Imagine a company so powerful that it didn't just sell products, it declared wars. A company that built its own navy, raised its own army, printed its own money, signed international treaties, and sentenced people to death. Now imagine that this wasn't a kingdom. It wasn't an empire. It wasn't even a country. It was a corporation. Today, companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Nvidia dominate the global economy. Together, they're worth trillions of dollars. But more than 400 years ago, long before Silicon Valley, before Wall Street, before modern capitalism even had a name, one Dutch corporation reached a value historians estimate at nearly $7.9 trillion in today's money. No business in history has ever come close. Its name was the Verenigd Oost-Indisch Company, the Dutch East India Company, or simply, the VOC. But this isn't a story about business. It's a story about ambition, greed, violence, and how a corporation became more powerful than entire nations. Because once a company discovers it can make unlimited money, the next thing it wants is unlimited power. To understand how this monster was created, we have to travel back to Europe at the beginning of the 17th century. At the time, Europe had developed an obsession, not with gold, not with diamonds, not with oil, with spices, pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and above all, nutmeg. Today, you can buy a jar of nutmeg for a few dollars. Back then, a single sack could be worth a fortune. In some markets, it rivaled the value of gold. Kings demanded it. Merchants risked everything for it. Doctors believed it could cure deadly diseases. Whether those claims were true hardly mattered. People believed them, and belief created demand. There was just one problem. These spices grew thousands of miles away on tiny tropical islands in Southeast Asia. Reaching them meant crossing oceans that had already swallowed countless ships. Storms, disease, pirates, starvation, and rival empires. A single voyage could take years. Many crews never came home. For independent merchants, the risk was unbearable. One failed expedition could wipe out an entire fortune. The Dutch Republic realized something extraordinary. If dozens of merchants kept competing against each other, they would all eventually lose. So in 1602, the government made a decision that changed world history. Every major Dutch trading company was ordered to merge into one giant enterprise. One company, one treasury, one fleet, one mission, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. But creating one massive company wasn't enough. It needed money, more money than any king was willing to lend. So the Dutch invented something revolutionary. Instead of asking one wealthy noble, they invited an entire nation to invest. For the first time in history, ordinary citizens could buy a small piece of a global business. A merchant, a brewer, a craftsman, even families with modest savings. Anyone could become an investor. And in return, they received something entirely new. A share, a tiny piece of ownership. Those shares could later be bought, sold, or traded. Almost overnight, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange came alive. Crowds gathered every day. Deals were shouted across bridges. Fortunes changed hands in minutes. Without realizing it, humanity had entered a completely new financial age. The modern stock market had been born. Money poured into the VOC from every corner of the Dutch Republic. Not thousands, not millions, but enough to finance something the world had never seen before. Because the VOC wasn't preparing to become the biggest trading company. It was preparing to become something far more dangerous. A corporation with the power of a nation. And that was only the beginning. Most companies exist to make money. The VOC wanted something far more valuable. Control. The Dutch government granted the company extraordinary powers. The right to sign treaties. The right to build fortresses. The right to mint its own currency. The right to raise armies. And when necessary, the right to wage war. No corporation before it, or since, has ever been given authority on such a scale. The line between company and country began to disappear. The VOC wasn't sending salesmen across the oceans. It was sending fleets. Towering warships armed with rows of heavy cannons crossed the Indian Ocean under the company's flag. Behind them came soldiers, engineers, governors, accountants, missionaries. Wherever those ships anchored, the VOC wasn't looking for customers. It was looking for obedience. If local rulers agreed to trade only with the Dutch, the company rewarded them. If they refused, everything changed. Ports were blockaded. Villages were burned. Trade routes were cut off. Fortresses rose where marketplaces once stood. Profit was enforced at the barrel of a cannon. The company's leaders understood one brutal truth. Competition destroys monopolies, and monopolies create unimaginable wealth. Nowhere was that philosophy more devastating than on a tiny chain of islands in Indonesia. The Banda Islands. Small, beautiful, almost invisible on a world map. Yet these islands possessed something the rest of the world desperately wanted. Nutmeg. At the time, Nowhere else on Earth produced it naturally. Every sack that left the islands became a fortune in Europe. But there was a problem. The Bandanese refused to sell exclusively to the Dutch. They traded with everyone: the English, Asian merchants, anyone willing to pay. From their perspective, it was simply good business. From the VOC's perspective, it was unacceptable. One man decided to solve that problem forever. His name was Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, a brilliant administrator, an ambitious commander, and one of the most feared figures in colonial history. Cohen believed peace was bad for business. He believed monopolies could never survive through negotiation alone. His vision was simple: control every nutmeg tree, control every shipment, control every coin flowing into Europe. In 1621, he sailed toward the Banda Islands with soldiers, warships, and a single objective: complete domination. What happened next shocked even some of his contemporaries. Villages were attacked, leaders were captured, many inhabitants were executed. Others fled into forests and mountains, where starvation and disease spread rapidly. Many survivors were later forced into slavery or displaced. Within a short period, the society that had lived on those islands for generations was devastated. The VOC had eliminated the very people who grew the spice it wanted. But empty islands couldn't produce profit. So the company imported enslaved laborers and settlers to work the plantations under military supervision. Nutmeg kept flowing. The dividends kept rising. Investors back in Amsterdam celebrated another successful year. Few of them would ever see the smoke or hear the cries that helped pay for those profits. History often remembers kings for conquest. But here, a corporation had achieved the same thing. Not for religion, not for glory, not for a flag, for quarterly profit. And this was only the beginning, because after conquering the Banda Islands, the VOC was no longer chasing wealth. It was building the largest corporate empire the world had ever seen. By the middle of the 17th century, the VOC had achieved something no corporation had ever imagined. It wasn't simply making money. It had built a global machine that printed wealth. Its ships stretched from the harbors of Japan to the ports of India, across Southeast Asia, around the Cape of Good Hope, and finally back to Amsterdam. Every voyage carried something priceless: silk from China, tea from Asia, fine porcelain, coffee, exotic hardwoods, and above all, the spices that Europe couldn't live without. But the company's greatest innovation wasn't what it transported. It was how it traded. Instead of sailing back to Europe after every purchase, the VOC created a massive trading network across Asia. Silver purchased goods in Japan. Those goods were exchanged for Chinese silk. The silk bought Indian textiles. The textiles purchased Indonesian spices. Every stop generated another profit. Every voyage multiplied the company's wealth. By the time its ships finally returned to Amsterdam, the cargo had earned profits several times over. The VOC wasn't just trading across continents. It had mastered the art of making money while staying at sea. So, its numbers became almost impossible to comprehend. More than 70,000 employees, hundreds of trading posts, a fleet that rivaled the navies of powerful kingdoms, thousands of soldiers stationed across Asia, entire cities built around its warehouses and forts. For decades, its shareholders received extraordinary dividends. Across Europe, investing in the VOC became a symbol of wealth. People believed the company could never fail. After all, how could anyone compete with a corporation that controlled oceans? But history has one unbreakable rule: the higher an empire climbs, the harder it falls. At first, the warning signs were almost invisible. Company officials quietly began using VOC ships to run their own private businesses. Cargo disappeared. Records were manipulated. Bribes became routine. Governors enriched themselves while the company paid the bills. Every level of the organization was infected. The machine that had created unimaginable wealth was now consuming itself from within. Then the world changed. European tastes began to shift. Tea, coffee, cotton, and fine textiles became more profitable than spices. At the very same time, a dangerous rival was rising: the British East India Company. Unlike the VOC, the British adapted quickly. They expanded into new industries, strengthened their military position, and steadily challenged Dutch dominance across Asia. The monopoly that had once seemed unbreakable started to crack. Then came another devastating blow. Nutmeg trees, once guarded more fiercely than treasure, were secretly smuggled out of the Banda Islands. Before long, nutmeg was growing in other colonies. The monopoly that had been built with so much violence simply disappeared. Prices collapsed, profits shrank, debts exploded. The corporation that had once seemed richer than entire kingdoms could no longer pay its own bills. On December 31st, 1799, the Dutch East India Company officially ceased to exist. Its charter expired. Its remaining possessions were taken over by the Dutch government. Its soldiers were dismissed. Its empire dissolved. After nearly 200 years, history's greatest corporation was gone, but its true legacy never disappeared. The VOC proved that a corporation could become richer than nations, command armies, shape global politics, and change the course of history. It also revealed something far more unsettling. When unlimited profit meets unlimited power, the cost is almost always paid by ordinary people. Empires collapse, kings are forgotten, flags are replaced, but ideas survive. Every stock exchange, every publicly traded company, every investor buying shares with a tap on a phone still operates inside a system whose foundations were laid centuries ago. The VOC vanished. Its logo faded. Its ships rotted away. But the blueprint it created still shapes the modern world. And perhaps that's the most astonishing part of the story. The greatest corporate empire in history didn't truly disappear. It simply changed its name.
If this story changed the way you see history, imagine what's coming next. Epoch Forge uncovers the world's greatest empires, forgotten civilizations, and shocking true stories one documentary at a time. Subscribe now, leave your thoughts in the comments, and hit like to support the next episode. History isn't over, we're just getting started.